My name is Elena Vance, and I'm 41. The first time my father called me a thief, he did it under oath, in front of a jury, in the county where he'd spent 3 decades acting like he owned the air. He stood there in a suit that smelled like cheap cologne, waving a manila folder like a flag, and said, "She hasn't worked a day since college, and now she's stealing from her own dead mother." I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of courthouse water from a plastic cup, metallic and lukewarm, and set it back down without a sound. Because my father, Robert Vance, I didn't know what was sitting in my attorney's briefcase. Not yet. In the Vance family, silence was always treated as guilt. If you didn't fight back, they said you were caught. If you stayed calm, they said you were cold. If you told the truth, they said you were dramatic. I learned early that you can't win with people who rewrite the rules to keep you small. Robert had been rehearsing this moment for months. He told the jury I was a ghost, a drifter, a woman who ran away to Washington, D.C., and hid because I couldn't handle real life. He said my job didn't exist. He said my company was a P.O. box. He said investigators found nothing but blank space where a career should be. He looked toward the jury and said, "Ask anyone in town. Elena hasn't been seen in 15 years. Then he looked straight at me and smiled like he'd finally cornered me where he felt strongest. On paper. In public. With witnesses. Behind him, my sister Ashley sat in the gallery, 7 years younger, wearing a designer cardigan I recognized because I'd quietly paid for her emergency 3 years ago through a gift fund she never asked questions about. She kept her eyes down and played grieving sister perfectly. The loyal daughter. The one who stayed while I left. That was always the story. It didn't matter that I paid for our mother's experimental treatments when insurance refused, or that I arranged private nurses when Robert didn't want strangers in the farmhouse. It didn't matter that I had quietly covered the farm's crisis in 2018, through channels that protected my work and his pride. Because Robert's favorite hobby wasn't farming. It was control. When our mother died, he didn't just try to take her money, he tried to erase me. I saw it the day after the funeral. When I walked down the farmhouse hallway and the space where my university honors and commissioning portrait used to hang was empty, not taken down for cleaning. Empty. With a faded square of wallpaper and a cheap tractor dealership calendar slapped over it like a bandage. He wanted my life to look blank so his accusations felt believable. Back in the courtroom, Robert's attorney, Gerald Davis, stepped forward with a smirk and asked the question they'd rehearsed like a punchline. "Miss Vance, can you provide this court with a single verifiable piece of evidence that you have held gainful employment at any point in the last decade? A pay stub. A tax return. Anything that isn't a shadow?" Robert leaned back with his arms crossed, like he'd already won. I kept my voice level. "I work in operations analysis. My clients value discretion. The records exist. But your lack of access to them is not my failure. It is your limitation." Robert laughed, sharp and mocking. "Discretion? You were a paper pusher. Elena, a glorified clerk. Don't dress up your laziness with big words." If I had been anyone else, that might have made me snap. But my entire adult life was built around one reality. You don't get to explain everything you've done, even to people who share your last name. Not if you want to keep breathing. Gerald Davis kept pressing. He brought up the trust my mother left behind, and the employment clause tied to it. He implied my mother included it because she knew I was a drifter. Then he pointed at Ashley, called her to the stand, and set the trap they'd prepared. Ashley testified with practiced fragility. She said I vanished for months. She said I talked about big contracts. She said whenever Mom needed help with bills. It was always her, not me. Then she delivered the dagger. Bank statements with thousands withdrawn from our mother's account. Signatures that didn't look like Mom's. Forgery. They were accusing me of forging my mother's signature while she was ill. The jury's faces hardened. I could feel their judgment like weight on my shoulders. To them I was the city daughter who forgot her roots and stole from the dead. Robert barked from behind his lawyer. "You've been caught. Elena, you're a thief and a liar." The judge, Miller told him to sit down, but even the judge looked unsettled. His eyes had been flicking to the small silver pin on my lapel, not because it was flashy, but because it meant something to someone who'd ever sat in the right rooms. I turned to my attorney, Marcus Thorne. Marcus wasn't local. He didn't wear a cheap suit and play to a small-town jury. He wore his suit like armor, because he spent 2 decades in military legal before he ever took private clients. He didn't stand to perform. He stood to end it. "Your Honor," Marcus said, calm and steady. The plaintiff's investigation was thorough by civilian standards, but it was searching for a person who, for national security reasons, is not permitted to exist in public databases. Since the plaintiff has raised criminal fraud, my client has been granted a limited waiver for judicial review. Then Marcus opened his briefcase and removed a single heavy black envelope, sealed, embossed with a gold emblem. You could feel the room change. Gerald Davis stepped forward, confused and defensive. "What is that? That has nothing to do with a trust dispute." Marcus didn't raise his voice. "It has everything to do with it." Judge Miller leaned forward. "Counsel, are you asserting this document contains classified information?" "I am," Marcus said. "A limited disclosure has been authorized for this court. It confirms my client's continuous active employment for the last 15 years and clarifies the nature of her cover designation." Robert stood up, chair screeching. "This is a stunt. She's nobody. I've seen her apartment. I've seen her life." Judge Miller snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Vance." Miller took the envelope with a slowness that made the room feel like it was holding its breath. He opened it with a letter opener and read the first page. Then he read it again. He removed his glasses and set them down. And when he looked up, his face wasn't the face of a tired county judge anymore. It was the face of an officer who recognized something he couldn't unsee. "Mr. Davis," Judge Miller said, voice heavier now, "you have built your case on the premise that Elena Vance is a ghost. You have accused her of theft, as her fraud, and failure." He paused and looked directly at my father. "I have before me a verified statement of service. It confirms that Elena Vance has held continuous classified employment for the last 15 years. The blank spaces in her records are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of protected service." Robert's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Ashley made a small, strangled sound and looked down like she wanted to disappear. Judge Miller continued. "The logistics group you mocked is a cover designation. Her lack of a digital footprint is not laziness. It is compliance. This court will now shift this matter in camera to protect sensitive information, and I suggest counsel reconsider the wisdom of continuing this complaint." The room went cold. Not quiet. Cold. Gerald Davis didn't argue. He didn't object. His confidence collapsed because this wasn't a debate anymore. It was a mistake he couldn't undo. Robert finally managed to croak. "We didn't know." I leaned forward slightly and spoke just loud enough for him to hear. "You weren't supposed to know details. You were supposed to know me." Judge Miller dismissed their complaint with prejudice, sanctioned them for wasting the court's time, and ordered immediate fees and damages for defamation. Ashley stopped looking like a victim and started looking like a person, realizing she'd been used as a prop. Robert tried one more time, voice cracked and small. "Elena, I thought you were nothing." I stood up, smooth, controlled, and for the first time that day I felt clean. "That was your favorite story," I said. "It was never my life." As I walked past the gallery, I didn't slow down. I didn't look at Ashley. I didn't give Robert the satisfaction of a final scene. I'd lived 15 years in forward motion. I wasn't about to stop now. Right before I pushed through the courthouse doors, I turned my head just enough to leave him with one truth he couldn't argue with. "The money for Mom's nurses," I said quietly. "That was me. The farm's bailout in 2018. The grant you called luck. That was me too. I never did it for your praise. I did it because she loved you." Then I added, simple and final, "That debt is settled. If you were in my place, would you keep protecting them in silence? Or finally let the truth speak for itself? Comment. Silent or truth? Outside. The hallway air felt crisp. Filtered. Like freedom. Marcus caught up with me near the elevator and handed me my briefcase without congratulations. Because we don't do that in my world. The director wants a debrief at 0800, he said. I nodded. Of course. As the elevator doors closed, I touched the silver pin on my lapel once, then let my hand drop. For 15 years, I'd shrunk myself to fit a narrative my family could understand. I accepted their pity and their insults because the alternative was danger. But today proved something I should have known earlier. You can't convince a man like Robert to see you. You can only remove his ability to define you. I walked out into the parking lot, got into my car, and sat for a moment in stillness, not because I was shaken, but because I was done. I started the engine and drove toward the sunrise, not looking back at the courthouse, not looking back at the town, not looking back at the story they tried to bury me inside. I wasn't a ghost. I was just out of their clearance. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one will hit even harder.